Welcome back everyone to episode 3 of our tutorial series on Advanced Tactics Gold. So we're going to hit end turn. On this episode we're going to go through production, and to do that I'm going to have to touch on supply a little bit. Now, instead of just hitting start turn, we're just going to take a brief peek at this. This is what we produced last turn. Note on the right hand side it'll always give you a little summary of all the losses and the kills that occurred since your last turn. Now for us it's just going to be based on the one enemy we're fighting, but sometimes you'll be fighting multiple enemies, multiple nations, multiple regimes, and this is going to be the sum of all of them. But there's a way to find out exactly what happened, and I'll show that history soon. Okay, but this production, we got 7,000 supply, political points, riflemen, a whole bunch of artillery pieces were built, and also some light tanks. That's fine. The ore and oil is not anything we're producing at our cities. Those are produced at the resource locations, and we're getting 120 and 2,000. Those things are always shown in green at the top. Well, it's only in green because we're gaining, so yeah, we are getting 16 more political points. And that's mainly used, I don't know if I mentioned this in the first episode, that's mainly used for research. That's generally the big drain on your political point, your officer pool, is to send those people out to test for new designs, which we'll get over maybe in 2 more videos or so. Okay, here's our raw, so we're actually losing 180 and gaining 120. We're losing raws overall. That's not a good thing, but we don't have any way to deal with it quite yet. So to figure out what we want to do for production, actually first of all, we probably don't need to deal with, I usually like to leave production to the very end of a turn, since you can wait to act and choose what to build, knowing exactly what you might need. For this turn we're just going to move this unit far forward. I kind of want to move him south so we can get more of an offensive going, especially because the northern units already took some casualties. The enemy units, I should say, already took some casualties, which should put us at a slightly better position in the north. I know that we're playing against ourselves, and my goal is not purely to win. This is mostly tutorial, but these are the kind of cool decisions you're going to have to make. Like, where should these reinforcements go? Well, if I want to defend in the north, ideally I would have 5 units, but we can probably hold it with 4, considering I only see 5 units from the enemy. So I'm going to move this unit south, which is going to reinforce our potential offensive action. I'm going to actually move these units around. This is a very interesting maneuver. So if I move here, and I move here, and I move this unit down like this, we actually have enough to get a 3-sided attack. If I just hit all, it'll bring everyone who can into this fight, which is all 3 of my units. I'd be below my attack stack. We'd have a 10% bonus for attacking from 3 sides. But the main reason I don't think we should do this is because we're still not quite at the 4-to-1 ratio that I think we should be at. They're about at 80 and we're about at 270. So I think we're better off just defending, holding our lines one more turn. But we're getting ourselves in a good position in order to attack from multiple sides next turn. In fact, one thing I'm going to push things even further. I'm going to move this unit here and this unit here, knowing that my other unit is coming up. Even if they can't see it and they want to try to push through the middle area here, I'm okay with that. We're also defending this unit's kind of flank. But since we have visibility, usually you can see units at least 2 away. It doesn't look like there's anybody. There may be somebody in Kiev. We're not sure about that because cities, forests, and mountains provide hide points. You can check this out by looking at the terrain. General hide points. So high mountains provide 30. I think most of the other ones just provide 20. So this one provides 20 hide points just by clicking on this little, what is this terrain? Otherwise this just brings up normal stats about plains. Okay, so plains don't have any hide points at all. Now the hide points is going to mean that we might not see a unit in Kiev or Kyiv. I'm going to keep calling it Kiev, and you may you may correct my pronunciation if you'd like. So what we're going to do is push our luck a little bit. We're going to move this unit forward. Okay, it turns out there is a unit in Kiev, but it's just an HQ unit, which is very vulnerable. Staff, as you can see from combat, remember we checked combat stats, are pretty weak. If I want to compare this against a normal rifleman, we can see that they attack and defend at only half the value of a rifleman. And despite, on top of only attacking and defending at half, they even have less hit points when it comes to infantry, which means, I don't know, they're not as well trained in getting into cover or whatever against enemy infantry. So you just don't want to lose them because they're actually more expensive than a rifleman. They cost 200 production points to build, but they are much easier to kill than a normal rifleman. So you want to leave them, as their name implies, staff, you don't want them on the front. The reason why we're doing this kind of bold maneuver, and I'm going to do this just so this unit doesn't get cut off, and I'm moving this unit down here. So what I'm going to do is end up leaving a hole for them to go through if they want, but I would just collapse if they did that. This unit's best options we'll start evaluating on the next turn, but I might intentionally just leave one of the Soviet units out so we can see what happens when you get a really multi-pronged attack. But otherwise, this is not a terrible decision. Knowing that there could have been units here is okay, because if they had had a lot of units, it probably would not have been able to hide all of them, and I would have had some information, some knowledge that there was more than one unit there. Alright, so that was all the movement I think we need to do. We kind of presented, we're just pushing through the middle of their lines. If I was the Russians, I would have defended probably one more to the north, knowing that this could have happened, just to make sure that if they squeeze through, it's only a 1 hex wide gap. 2 hex wide is not what you'd probably want to leave in your lines. Ultimately, you don't want to you don't want to leave any holes in your lines, but at the very beginning, when forces are still just being put to the front, you just start prioritizing the most valuable hex. And in this case, the most valuable hex would have been this one instead of this one, just because it would have been a better strategic defensive position. Okay, well that's all the stuff we wanted to do for movement, because I'm just going to maintain my positions. Remember, maintaining your position can increase your entrenchment a little bit. I think 81 might be the most that we're able to get, but it's good that we're at least getting that. Now, we're going to move on to production. Though my normal cycle of things, if you want to follow the same thing, is I first move my engineers, which we currently have none. They're going to be in charge of building roads, doing anything like this, and sometimes you'll move your sometimes you'll move your engineers after your main army if you need to build a road into enemy territory or something like this. But also, you may want to, let's say you don't want to build an enemy territory, you want to build a road here. It may be possible for you to attack this unit, push it back, and then you don't have a zone of control penalty, movement penalty, remember the action points. But you can see that now we're not really dealing with action points as much. I was able to move 2 hexes with this unit, which cost 50 each. But now I'm just going to follow the general rule of thumb that my infantry can move 2 and in enemy territory and 3 in my own. We can see that this one already moved 1 because we shifted north, and it can still move 2 backwards, or it could attack 1, which would be its 1 movement into enemy territory. And all the action points are still adding up, but we're not going to cover that any further. Okay, so now let's go to production. The main production menu, you have to select a city or any kind of source of production before you can get it. So our cities, our capitals, those are what we're talking about. Technically, these oils and these raws are production sites, but unless you cannot actively select the production menu from them. Although if you pull up the production menu, you can click on these and actually set something from them. So this is the production menu that we're going to be using a lot of. It can also be accessed with the P key, but again, you have to be selecting a city to get to access it. Now this is one way of doing it. You can bounce around to each individual city and just manually change productions. Sometimes it can be hard to remember what every city is producing. I find the best way of changing the production is to use the production overview. This also here has the select HQ, which means that if you change the headquarters, we can do this. For example, let's say Odessa is currently producing 4 light tanks. Right now the red means that they're heading back to the red headquarters, which is our Supreme headquarters. If we wanted to change that, we could just say select HQ and get them to change to the second army, which is the green. Now, everything produced in Odessa is going to be filtered directly to this headquarters. This can be useful for getting units to the front a little bit faster, but if I'm honest, my way of dealing with this, unless you really need to jump things forward by a turn, I prefer to leave my hands off a little bit more and let the automatic dispersal of units happen. We haven't covered that yet, but it's part of the TOE, the table of equipment, table of organization and equipment, which I'm actually not able to access from this scenario. So we'll cover it in like the last video, jumping into a new game. But if you manually select what unit you want the city to produce for, it just jumps, if we left it as red, the Supreme headquarters gets the units, which you can see it has many of, and then we have to transfer them to the subordinate headquarters. So if you just manually set these to a subordinate headquarters directly, whichever one needs it, you can immediately on the next turn have those units arrive at the subordinate headquarters. Okay, so we'll actually do that. But we're probably not going to get Odessa to create something like tanks. And I'm actually also going to switch Kolberg over. So we'll just use this HQ of location, also the O key on the computer. And we'll get this one to turn blue. So that one's now giving its whatever it builds to First Army. The last thing we want to do to check things for production. So we will be going to production and we'll be doing production overview. I'll just click that real fast. And important on the right is your total production. This is everything you're producing. But also important on the left-hand side under the headquarters, we can see that Kolberg and Odessa are supplying the subordinate headquarters, not the Supreme Command. So we need to make sure that the relevant units are going to these different headquarters, which means probably not sending tanks to the Second Army and just riflemen to the First Army. We may want to send a mix of units, like let's get them to build 50% rifles, so 40 rifles. But maybe in Kolberg, our First Army, more defensive oriented, should actually be getting some more machine guns. So we can do that. Odessa, we're putting a little bit more on the attack, so in fact light tanks could make sense. But maybe we only want 2 light tanks. This is not a good idea. I think 4 light tanks is a better decision, but just to demonstrate. And maybe we wanted some cavalry. Whoops. Don't do what I have done. We want to go back to vehicles, light tanks, and choose the empty production thing. And now go down to infantry, cavalry. So we could do this if we wanted. But I think, in fact, that building 4 tanks is better for an offensive. So we'll leave it like that. Now, what the important question you have to ask yourself, this is kind of fun to fool around with all the different riflemen, infantry, building whatever you want. I'll try to give my recommendations for a decent production at the end, but the first and foremost thing we have to worry about is supply. We're currently building 7,000 supply. If I click on my Supreme headquarters, we can see that because on the last turn all of the cities were going to my Supreme headquarters, it received all that supply, and it has a supply stockpile of 10,000. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly how much supply stockpile went up, because we don't know what the supply stockpile was last turn. I would say the best way of judging how much supply you should be making, is just to monitor your supply stockpile. I think that a good rule of thumb is having at least triple what you're sending out, because your main headquarters is going to use stuff itself. In fact, because we're not being very efficient, our Supreme Command is hoarding a lot of units. Because I haven't talked about transferring units out quite yet, and I probably won't do that on this video. But right now, the Supreme Headquarters is probably consuming almost 1,000 supply itself. You normally won't have this situation. You'll have a small reserve of forces, but probably less than 1,000 supply worth, and this is actually probably over 1,000. Okay, so how much supply should we be making then? I would say just monitor your supply stockpile. 10,000 is a good minimum number. 20,000 is probably getting on the maximum level that I would put it. I like to keep my supply between 10 and 20,000. But it depends on how many forces I have. On a smaller map, then 10,000 is maybe more than enough. But on a bigger map, maybe 20,000 is more your minimum. How you check that is by going over to statistics, and we're going to, you see I've already done it, going to click on supply. So this is going to show us how much our subordinates were requesting out, and it's going to show me how much this unit consumes itself. So technically, this unit consumes only 558, but I don't think that's actually true. Okay, so I should put it this way. Since the start of since the start of this turn, the supply was consumed first, and then my infantry, the new riflemen's, were added. What that means is, I think we've changed it. It used to be 80 riflemen from Kolberg that went to the Supreme Command, and now it's only 40 because we added machine guns. But before, it was 160 rifles. So our current supply was based on only having 160 rifles, 4 light tanks, 4 infantry guns, etc. Basically half all of these numbers. Now these haven't changed because we didn't produce any staff. Oh, I think we actually did produce flak. Let's double check again. Whoops. And this is why you normally have your Supreme Headquarters on a city hex to make it a little easier to move back and forth. Yeah, so we are also building 4 flak. So 4 flak was also built. All of those numbers are not going into our current turn supply consumption. In fact, I did the math off camera. Every one of our divisions, and they're all standardized, is consuming 81 supply per turn. You can do this and add up all the math yourself if you'd like, just by clicking on a rifleman, going to general, and this is their supply consumption. They can also carry 2 supply, and that's actually, they can carry an infinite number of supply if you want them not to move. We can see that my Supreme Command is currently immobile. What this means is it can't move just because it can't carry all the supply stockpile with it. So if we were to move now, we would either lose supply or we wouldn't be able to move anyway. If we click on move, it does show that we can move, but like I said, you'll leave your supply stockpile behind. You'll have to ditch it. We don't want to do that. I think we currently can carry, actually I don't even know how much we can carry. It's based on our train's carry capacity. So normally your Supreme Command, I moved it in the beginning just to show the stacking, but normally you don't want to move it out of the initial city. It just is going to stay there, and it shouldn't ever be involved in combat. So we don't usually need it to be close to the combat troops. Remember I talked about, I haven't talked about HQ proximity, have I? Yeah, that's one of the advanced mechanics of combat. We'll talk about it on Rush's next turn. But generally you want your headquarters close to the units they're commanding, which increases their efficiency. Okay, we've rambled on a little bit. Let's actually get into how much supply we should be building. So if each one of these units is 81 and I have 12 of them, then that's, what was it? I did the math, it was like 600. I'm just having to roughly guess again. It's probably, no, maybe around 700. It's slightly under 800 is my guess. Wait, 12 times 81 is going to be more than 800. Sorry, it's going to be like 960. So it's about 1,000 consumption from our 12 divisions. So they each consume 81 and it's 12, so it's like 12 times 80, which would be 960. But that's 1,000. What we can see from this estimate is our out-of-going supply request was 480, and our current consumption is 550. But that doesn't take into account the units that were built on this turn. Essentially, the increase that I talked about, the 160 to 320 rifle, the doubling of the light tanks, infantry guns, etc. So the best way I would say is just to get a feel for your supply stockpile growing, because It's hard to get a raw number without going around to every unit and multiplying 30 by 2 to get 60 supply consumption, or to do what I did, is to get the amount of supply this is consumed. Basically, all infantry consumes 2 supply, your AT gun consumes 6 supply, and the horses consume 1 supply. So that's where the 81 comes from. You could count up everything and you'd know exactly, but I feel like this is a very difficult way of playing the game. So my guess is we're probably consuming, I think 2,000 supply would be a conservative estimate. So we'll go back to production, and that's going to give us just how much supply we want to build. I think we'll be okay even just getting, let's just go with 2,700 supply, which will have the added benefit that we have 0.3 left over, and this is going to produce 2666.7. So we'll be back to whole numbers of supply. I don't like dealing with these leftover fractions. It's completely okay to use them, but just in an OCD way, I don't like it. So, plus we have guesstimate our supply consumption is 2,000, so we could actually do 2,000, but we should overshoot by a little bit. And now what we're going to do, if you want, you can even write down for the first couple of turns when it's really important, how much your supply stockpile it changes. So next turn we're going to send out the supplies and consume them ourselves. And then how much are we going to have left over? I'm guessing that with 2,700 we're being a little bit too conservative. So we'll probably end up with maybe only 8,000 in our supply stockpile. But that's okay. We can increase the supply next turn. Now what are we going to do with the rest of our production? A note, a word to the wise. Advanced Tactics Gold doesn't give you any kind of warning if you choose not to use the full production of your city. If I hit end turn right now, we'd be wasting 60% of Berlin's production. Well, there are a few things I think we need. First of all, if you take a look at the staff percentage, we're at 25%, which means that we're understaffed compared to our needs, which is not efficient. Our first army and our second army are okay staffed, so we don't need to think about increasing their numbers above 30 quite yet, but we're definitely understaffed from our main headquarters. So we're going to build some more staff first, and we're also going to build some engineers because I'd like to demonstrate their capabilities, and we currently have none. So in Berlin, we will get some engineers. I think maybe just 40 is okay. And we also want some staff. 40 more staff. Oh, I was wrong. Well, staff are only 100, the same cost as riflemen. So they don't cost more to build, but they just are significantly worse in combat. You obviously don't want to use them in combat. So now we're going to get 40 more staff, 40 engineers, along with our supply. What is the other stuff we want to build? Well, we can continue to accrue a bonus of riflemen, but in order to show off another aspect of the game, I'm going to go to non-combat and switch this over to political points. So we're going to gain more political points so that I have the opportunity to actually research something. So that's what we'll be doing. This one in Milan is really a hodgepodge of a lot of artillery pieces, and right now we're losing enough raw that we need to cut back on this. So what I'm going to do instead is let's continue to build artillery. That's okay with me, but other than that, right now we're still not even breaking even, but we have a small amount saved up, and eventually we'll be increasing our raw production when we get some engineers. So I'm going to be okay with only losing 16 raws per turn. One note about this, the resources are first taken away before they're added. So if you have a production queue of, let's say, these 4 artillery, but you run out of raws, like you have let's say minus 200 plus 200, but you only have 150 raw, you won't actually be able to build the artillery because the 150 will dry up when you subtract the 200 first, and then only after that, when the artillery is not able to be built, you'll add the 200 back to your pool. So just remember that your bank always has to cover your whatever deficit you're going to have for the next turn, even if your increase is going to be more than your deficit. Okay, so we will switch this over to... In fact, we can start getting some aircraft, but I think those are also going to cost us a lot of raw. So what we'll do is just build some infantry. And riflemen don't cost any raw, so that's a good unit to build. In the other, so we have political points, Odessa's building some tanks, and then we have some riflemen and machine guns. Machine guns do take a few raws to build. I think, I don't even remember where it is for the build cost, but I just know, like, you can see that if I go down to 0, we lose that 16, so they each cost 1 raw to build. I don't remember how to find that, but you can just do it by, showing yourself how many raws it costs to build. So that's production. You'll be setting menus and selecting different headquarters. We have a good idea of what to look for. I'll be sure to note that our supply stockpile was 10,000 on this turn, and when we come back, maybe in 2 more videos, maybe in the next video, we'll take a look at the supply stockpile if it has grown or shrunk. So thanks for watching. I know this is a longer episode, but knowing how to do production is important. So when we get engineers, we'll be able to talk about factories, which is going to be production part 2. But until then, I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in episode 4.